Every time I pass by the park, I remember the murder of Declan Flynn.
Declan Flynn was set upon by 5 men, including a youth. He was savagely beaten, unconscious, and left mortally wounded.
Especially when I pass by in the train, because you can take a leisurely view right across the park and you can actually see the scene. And it all comes back then. Some things you don't forget.
It's the first time I've really talked publicly about Declan. It's very difficult to actually try and understand how somebody can do that to another human being. It really was just a case of the strong beating up the weak. And they did it because they were able to do it, because they thought he was different.
I was at home 5:15 in the morning on Friday the 10th and received a phone call. All I was told was I had to go into Fairview Park where there had been an assault. I left home and I went into Technical Bureau in Phoenix Park where I collected my equipment and also met up with the Garda photographer. Well, I arrived at 6:40 and the scene had been cordoned off and being preserved.
Edwin Hancock is a retired detective inspector from Ireland's police service and Garda Síochána.
I was attached to the ballistics section and we specialise in explosives, firearms and scenes of crime examination.
September 10th, 1982. The badly beaten body of 31-year-old Declan Flynn was found in Fairview Park, Dublin.
Gardaí today searched the park for clues that would lead them to the man's attackers. They say 2 people walking through the park found him at 1:30 this morning near the bandstand, not far from the main road. He was suffering from serious head injuries and died before he reached hospital.
Declan was killed just a few hundred yards across the road from where we are now. The scene was actually in a grass area which came right up to the footpath along the main road. He'd be about 30 to 40 feet away from escaping. It's a very rough sketch that I drew when I was examining the scene. It shows the fence along by the children's park. There were 3 areas of blood on the grass. The first area measured about 2 inches diameter, and a foot from that there was a long piece of blood, about 1 foot 4 inches long, tapering from 2 inches up to 6 inches. And I took possession of 3 sticks altogether. That was an indication there were at least 3 people involved. So it was a vicious attack. I mean, those sticks that were used were quite heavy. I weighed the sticks and I compared them to the official police truncheon that we were all issued with as policemen. But its weight was only 13 ounces, whereas all the sticks that were used were considerably heavier than that. They were formidable weapons.
It was a very busy house with 9 children and mum and dad, so there was always a lot of coming and going and friends calling. It was like a train station at times.
My name's Gabriel Fay and Declan was my older brother.
I'm Lorraine Crowley and Declan was my older brother as well. I do have very happy memories of Declan Christmas time. That was his absolute favourite time of the year and he was very, very generous.
He may come home with a set of Delf and hand them to Mammy. He always came home with bags. Our first child was born in April 1982. To say that he absolutely loved Stephen, the baby, was an understatement. Stephen was 5 months old when Declan was murdered. Yeah.
My name is Paul Flynn and I'm Declan Flynn's brother. The way he fit into our house was he was a caring person, but also a person that needed a lot of care as well. He had a stammer, and as he grew older, we realised that he had learning difficulties. The more kind of excited he got, or the more nervous he got, the more he stammered. So it was something that really he struggled with all his life. He was also left-handed. He was actually beaten by the teachers for using his left hand. he would have definitely had challenges when it comes to making new friends and would have been painfully shy, I think, when meeting people for the first time. He definitely needed extra help, and my mother was very, very good to him. She put a huge amount of effort into helping him, and to be fair to him, the love she gave him, he returned that love to her as well. Sorry. Sorry.
I can remember the day very well. It's one of those days that will stick in your mind forever. We heard on the radio news that a man's body had been found in Fairview Park, and we were just remarking, gosh, that's not very far from here, really. Came home that evening from work, and Mum was at home. She had been in town that morning, and it was only when she came up from town in the early afternoon she realised Declan hadn't come home the previous night and his bed hadn't been slept in. And she was quite upset. She was cooking dinner, but she was quite upset. She said, "Did you read the paper?" And she handed me the Evening Herald, and I read the description of the man whose body had been found in Fairview Park. And my heart sank because it sounded just like Declan. And the only thing I didn't know was, they said the man had green eyes. I didn't know Declan had green eyes. Sorry.
Eventually, my eldest brother, Chris, and my sister, Miriam, decided to go up to Blanchardstown, and they met a guard up there. He brought Christopher in to see the body. When Christopher saw him first, he wasn't even sure if it was Declan, because he was so badly beaten. I'll never forget the sound that came from my parents. It was like something left their bodies. I think it's a kind of a sound only a parent can make when they lose a child. Even though he was an adult, he had a lot of childlike features, and he was one of those vulnerable people that needed protection. Sorry.
Declan's injuries consisted of he had a black eye, very badly swollen, he's cut underneath here, his nose was grazed, and he had 1 3/4 inch cut here in the back of his head. He actually died from inhalation of his own blood. The knees of Declan's trousers were grass-stained. The indication that he was on the ground when he was getting beaten. Yes, we checked for defensive injuries and we didn't see any indication of them, which would tend to suggest that he was completely overpowered and didn't have a chance to defend himself. And he must have been absolutely terrified. He died a horrible death.
Hi, I'm Tony Walsh, and for the last 30 years, I've curated what's now known as the Irish Queer Archive, which was transferred to state ownership in 2008. I only came out in 1979, and the LGBT civil rights movement at that point was in its infancy. As a 19-year-old, I was quite naive and actually blind to the dangers that lurked around, and there were many. Dublin was dirt poor, economically, socially depressed. That was also aggravating the significant heroin crisis. And I had a revelatory moment when I discovered the Hirschfeld Centre. I was hooked the minute I walked in there. Dublin's second attempt at an LGBT community centre was only 6 months old. There were very few social spaces available to us. All forms of intimacy between men was criminalised. Technically, you get 2 years for holding hands or kissing in public. Yes, of course I knew Declan Flynn. I mean, he was part of what we call the social subcommittee, and that was a group of people that was entrusted with running all of the social events in the Hirschfeld Centre, and Declan ran the coffee bar.
He would have been very well known because he was kind of a volunteer in the Hirschfeld Centre, so most people would have had some interaction with him when they came out. To me, he seemed like an extraordinarily shy, quiet man. And I think he liked the coffee bar in particular because it gave him a chance to speak to other people without feeling too vulnerable in the conversation.
I mean, I knew he was gay because actually we had those conversations and I saw his name on our members book and everything.
Declan settled in at the Hirschfeld Centre, but outside, homosexuality remained illegal. and there was little support for a change in the law.
The occasion of this unusual protest vigil outside the RTE studios was the appearance of two lesbian nuns on The Late Late Show. The protesters had a statue of the Virgin Mary strapped to the roof of a caravan.
When news trickled in of Declan in September 1982, I don't think many of us were that surprised. There was a culture of homophobic violence that simmered on the surface of Irish society throughout the 70s and 80s. There was a litany of what we now consider like anti-gay hate crimes. People being beaten up with impunity and people being murdered.
You know, obviously the scene was much smaller, it was much more covert, it was pockmarked by violent homophobia that was, you know, kind of accepted within society. So the killing of Declan Flynn didn't occur in a vacuum. There was a hotel porter in Cork actually killed the night before Declan Flynn was killed in September '82. And there was also around the same time another homophobic killing, Ballymena. But one of the really major kind of events that occurred that year was the killing of Charles Self.
Charles Self was a gay man found stabbed to death in his home in Monkstown in January 1982. Just 9 months later, Declan became the fourth gay man to die a violent death that year. David Norris served as an Irish senator across 5 decades.
I'm in an unusual position for somebody of my social background. I've known 8 people who were murdered. Now that tells you something about being gay. The first time I encountered Declan Flynn was on the opening night of the Hirschfeld Centre. A group of us, about 4 or 5 of us, came back here and had a glass of champagne to celebrate. And Declan was one of the people who came back. I didn't really know him up till that point, but he came back and he was nice. And we had a photograph was taken. And poor Declan, he looked so innocent and sensitive and vulnerable. And of course he was vulnerable and he paid for it. Poor fellow.
Declan was still living at home and continuing to volunteer at the Hirschfeld Centre, but he also had a day job which he enjoyed.
He was based in Dublin Airport and he was part of the ground operations in Airínta, and that seemed to be probably the happiest place for him to work. We were a bit worried about him as he'd been bullied in school, so we were worried if he would bond and fit in there.
Some of his fellow employees were on a night out, kind of gay spotting for fun, you know, going into the gay bars and whatnot. And they came to Barclay Duns and they saw Declan and they teased him about it. And that stopped him going. And he started going instead to Fairview Park. And that was where he met his end, very sadly.
Detectives now began to piece together Declan's last known movements.
So the night he was killed was September the 9th, 1982. He'd been in a pub in Donecarney, Belton's pub, with a friend, and had met another friend then just outside the Fairview Grill. And then had crossed into Fairview Park. Fairview Park, at the time, it would have been known to be a place where gay men would have hung out, a lot like in the same way like Burkey and Phoenix Park and things like that. So it was kind of known as that kind of place.
The only opportunities we had to negotiate desire and intimacy lurked in the shadows.
In the early 80s and late 70s, probably most gay men on the scene had gone to a gay cruising area, either a public park or public toilet at some point. Cruising is a very covert activity, so when you're cruising, you're not being deliberately kind of provocative. It's very discreet. There's a kind of dance or kind of walking up and down, making sure that the person that you're interested in knows that you're there without necessarily making your own hand very obvious. When I found out it was Declan who had been killed in Fairview Park, I was very surprised because he's so shy and quiet. I didn't think he had the wherewithal to go cruising. To me, it sounded more likely that he was simply on his way home.
Whatever Declan's reasons, few were in any doubt about his attacker's motivation, including police.
Yeah, we were aware that gay men had been attacked in the park at night time. Oh, it had been going on for at least a couple of months before this.
Now Declan's family were forced to ask whether police could have prevented his death.
We were later told by a guard he had gone in to patrol Fairview Park the night before Declan was killed, and that his officer in charge had told him not to do that, to go off and do something else instead.
In September 1982, 31-year-old Declan Flynn was found dead in Fairview Park in Dublin. He had been badly beaten. Police believed it was a homophobic attack, and newspaper reports now focused on Declan's sexuality.
We didn't know Declan as a gay person. We just knew him as our brother. That was it.
But I mean, obviously, if we'd known, we would have been totally accepting of it because he was our brother and we loved him.
It must have been very difficult for Declan Flynn's family to have to engage with the extraordinary level of media interest, putting a backstory to Declan's personality.
It definitely felt that Declan was being stigmatised for being gay. There was more attention focused on that than on the thugs that had actually beat him to death. All that attention was very difficult for the family.
Following the killing, Detective Inspector Edwin Hancock expected to be involved in a lengthy manhunt, but within hours, 5 males were in custody.
The first thing I knew about arrest was on the Sunday when I got a phone call to go into Fitzgibbon Street Garda Station. That the suspects were in detention.
Robert Armstrong, who was 18, Anthony Marr, 18, Patrick Kavanagh, 18, there was Colm Donovan, who was 17, and then there was a 14-year-old boy who couldn't be named at the time.
Detectives were surprised when all 5 suspects quickly confessed to killing Declan.
By and large, you know, they all essentially gave an account of what happened. They basically said that one of them sat on the bench almost as some kind of type of bait or something. The rest of them were waiting, I think, behind trees or behind bushes and things like that with sticks as weapons.
I went into Fitzgibbon Street on the Sunday afternoon and I met Anthony Marr and Robert Armstrong. They were 2 members of the Defence Forces.
Their confessions meant all 5 suspects now faced murder charges and possible life sentences, yet none of them seemed concerned.
They were very polite, very cooperative. They gave no trouble and they made their statements to the Gardaí present. I also met Dr. Percy Patton, the Garda doctor. He took blood and hair samples from the 2 and gave them to me. I also showed them what I'd gathered from the scene. One of them said that he recognised the 6.
When Declan Flynn passed, they basically jumped out and attacked him. And they beat him really, really brutally with sticks. They kicked him, they beat him on the ground, to the point that basically he passed out from concussion, from head injuries, and from bleeding. There, he died.
They were totally cooperative and very friendly, and there was no sense of hostility from them. They made statements freely. I didn't get the impression that they were scared. No, not at all.
The following statements were included in statements made to the police by the accused, which were subsequently read in court in evidence. The gang was acting as a kind of self-professed vigilante group. They had wanted, quote, to clear our park of what we call queers, unquote. They had been, in their words, queer bashing for about 6 weeks before and had battered 20 steamers. What this gang did to Declan Flynn was part of a sustained campaign against gay people in Fairview Park. I think it's clear that their attitude to the crime they'd committed was that it was a justified activity. A journalist at the time of the Flynn case reported, "One went queer bashing once. Himself and his 2 mates went out to rob a car, but they couldn't find one, So they decided to go down to Berg Key and wait for a few queers. The queer bashing, to use the gang's language, they viewed it as a leisure activity. It was something you did with your friends. It was a pleasurable way of spending an evening. It was good fun. In his statement, Maher claimed, "We didn't mean to kill Mr. Flynn. I thought he was gay and in the park to meet other gay people." The second statement there, it does seem like some attempt to justify the violence that they inflicted on Declan Flynn.
They had claimed that they had physically attacked or assaulted 20 men. It was a violent homophobic mission that they were on and had been on for about a month and a half.
These were views and values of a homophobic nature that were deeply embedded in Irish life. Did they perhaps feel that this killing of a gay man, that it would be perceived as less serious by the society, including the courts?
News of the gang's homophobic vigilante campaign came as no surprise to the gay community, and police knew about it too.
Yeah, we were aware that gay men had been attacked in the park, which had been going on for at least a couple of months before this.
There were various reports of people being queer bashed in Fairview Park and in Phoenix Park and elsewhere. So there were quite a number of reports that we were hearing about at the time. Indeed, I knew several people myself personally who were bashed on several occasions.
I remember a bright summer's day at 10:30 at night outside a bar just off Grafton Street in Dublin, having my head kicked in and my finger broken by 3 guys who were screaming nasty abuse at me. And the worst thing is, nobody came to my rescue, and I can guarantee, I didn't even bother, I can guarantee if I'd gone down to the police station, they wouldn't have actually taken it seriously. The relationship between the Gardaí and the lesbian gay community was fraught.
The police inquiry into the murder of Charles Self had involved the entire gay community and left many feeling their sexuality was under investigation.
They feared being outed to their families. Some men were married and their wives obviously didn't know about it. They had children. People at work in their workplaces would feel that their jobs were compromised.
At that particular time, homosexuality was illegal in this country. The consequence of all that would be that a lot of crime and incidents were not being reported. So the Gardaí couldn't have known the full extent of what was actually happening in there.
Following Declan's death, others came forward to say they too were victims of violence in Fairview Park and claimed their reports were ignored by police, like Sean Purcell, a sub-editor at the Irish Press newspaper.
I was pulled to the ground and I was held on the ground by one man lying across my head while 2 others beat me systematically with sticks.
What response did you get to that complaint to the Gardaí?
The Garda said he'd keep an eye out while he was patrolling the area. I heard no more about the attack until Declan Flynn was found dying in the park one morning in September.
Frustrated at the lack of action by the police, some in the gay community began gathering their own evidence.
An activist friend of ours, Eddie, got reports of a gang of thugs up in Fairview Park and spent several months actually shadowing them.
You'd made a list of names of all the people and their addresses who were doing the attacks. Had this been given to the police prior to Declan Flynn's murder?
Oh yes, about 4 months beforehand.
What reaction, or what had the reaction to the police? Did you do anything about it?
Little or nothing. Like, I think that I got round off dealing with Clontarf. Anyone that has gone up to Clontarf in the past with complaints have just got a negative response, and it made people very, distrustful of going up there.
And at one point, when he insisted on trying to get them to take it seriously, they threatened to arrest him.
We were later told by a guard he had gone in to patrol Fairview Park the night before Declan was killed, and that his officer in charge had told him not to do that, to go off and do something else instead. And that's very hard to bear, to know that, something could have been done, but because they didn't obviously consider somebody who was gay or different in some way, obviously wasn't important enough to actually make sure they were safe.
That attitude was common right across society in 1980s Ireland.
So it meant that Ireland was a really uncomfortable place to come out in. It was an uncomfortable place to grow up as a gay man or woman, or as a trans man or woman. It was like living under the Taliban. That's what I always feel the late 70s and 80s was, living under the Taliban.
David, why do gay people feel they're an oppressed minority?
Well, because in certain ways I think we are oppressed. Any group that is defined in terms of sin and of crime cannot feel anything else but oppressed.
I was always extremely careful. And I mean, for 30 years, I didn't go into a public lavatory in case there was an agent provocateur down there and I could be arrested. I mean, some police stations were very good, but others were appalling in the record of the way they treated gay people.
Inspector Angus Hussey, I am in charge of the National Garda Diversity and Integration Unit. I think definitely the Guards do reflect where society was at a certain period of time. I think we have learned a lot and changed a lot over the decades. I think we're much more open to change now and much more aware of the diverse and minority groups that are out there. I can't comment on the Declan Flynn case as it happened almost 40 years ago. However, I do know that if it happened today, it would be dealt with differently. Today, the investigation into Declan's killing would be dealt with as a hate crime investigation.
With 5 men in custody charged with murder, Declan Flynn's family and their supporters felt justice was sure to be done.
When people were apprehended for it, we felt this is a chance for justice for the community. And the fact that the people were pleading guilty was another added benefit. In a way, it seemed to remove the police from the process, so there was some confidence that the judicial system would deliver a fair verdict.
We really thought that this was cut and dried, that the evidence was there and that they would be punished for their crime.
But just as Ireland's police service reflected the country's values in the 80s, so too did the justice system.
The Declan Flynn case highlights that the climate in which criminal trials are conducted matters. Criminal trials can be influenced by the atmosphere of society, by the values of society. The law on murder and manslaughter hasn't really changed. The law on sentencing hasn't really changed. But our values as a society have changed. That's a very important thing to consider when we look at criminal trials.
Ireland's social values came to bear on the trial when Declan's killers offered a plea.
The 5 suspects in the case were initially all charged with murder, but 4 of them pleaded guilty to manslaughter.
The 4 were Robert Armstrong, Anthony Marr, Patrick Kavanagh and Colm Donovan. They admitted to attacking Declan, but claimed it was manslaughter as they never intended to kill him. The Director of Public Prosecutions accepted this guilty plea. It was a controversial decision that meant 4 of the 5 suspects would now not face a murder trial.
At a time when one couldn't be sure that a jury of 12 people would take seriously a murder charge against somebody who was present in a known gay cruising area at a time when homosexual acts were against the law. Perhaps the DPP was concerned that if it went to a full murder trial, that a jury might actually acquit them, and that would have been an extremely bad result. And so only one of them went on trial for murder. The trial of the youngest, the 14-year-old, went ahead.
The 14-year-old was never named because of his age. From the start, Edwin knew that the forensic case against him was weak.
I remember he was being defended by Mr. O'Higgins. O'Higgins wanted to know, could the forensic evidence link his client with the scene and with the murder? So I told him no, it couldn't be linked. So the 6 could be matched to the beating, but none of that could be linked back to any of the suspects, because we didn't have DNA back in those days.
Meanwhile, barristers for the accused claimed the 14-year-old had not played a significant part in the attack.
It would seem that the 14-year-old's defence basically was that he had a very minimal role in what transpired, that he was behind a tree while the others inflicted the main blows to Declan Flynn's body, and that although he hit Declan Flynn, he hit him on the behind, and that wouldn't have been a material cause of death.
Before the jury could even consider whether the boy was guilty of murder, the judge, Mr. Justice Gannon, intervened.
He withdrew the murder charge from the jury, which is something that a trial judge can do. It's part of the function of a trial judge to withdraw a charge from the jury if he or she feels that there's insufficient evidence. On the basis of the newspaper reports, with no great explanation as to why the murder charge was withdrawn.
The judge actually instructed to the jury that he not be found guilty of murder due to insufficient evidence, and he was found guilty of manslaughter.
4 men and 1 child were now guilty of killing Declan. It was up to Mr. Justice Gannon to determine their sentences.
I asked for time off from work, and my colleagues in the bank tried to persuade me not to go down. But I just felt I had to go down because I wanted to see what these people looked like. I wanted them to look like monsters, but they didn't.
One defendant appeared for sentencing wearing his Irish Air Corps uniform, and there was no shortage of support for the defendants.
We had priests giving character references for the killers. We had the killers themselves vindicating their behaviour by positioning themselves and declaring themselves anti-gay vigilantes, and that went unchallenged in court.
All 5 were guilty only of manslaughter, but could still face lengthy jail terms.
On a conviction for manslaughter, a judge has a very wide sentencing discretion. So a judge can impose on a conviction for manslaughter any sentence up to and including life imprisonment.
But what happened next was really what instigated or doubled down, I suppose, on the horror of the event.
Mr. Justice Gannon, at the sentencing stage, according to the newspapers, made several statements saying, this was an abhorrent crime, that it was one of the saddest and most tragic cases ever to come before the courts.
But the Flynn family were shocked when the judge then expressed sympathy for Declan's killers.
Justice Gannon said at the time that these people were from good families, that they probably had a low risk of reoffending, that they've learned their lesson. We're all entitled to our prejudices and biases, but we're not entitled to express them through violence.
The words Justice Gannon used when he was summing up were the ultimate insult to my family and my parents, and to Declan. I'm sure there's plenty of killers come from good households. That wasn't what he was charged to do.
He passed a number of sentences. They were of varying lengths, up to and including 5-year sentences. Crucially, all sentences were suspended.
I was so naive at the time. I didn't know what 5 years sentence suspended. I had to ask my brother, what does that mean? And he said, they're getting off. And I could not believe it. I wanted to shout up something and protest, but I just wasn't brave enough to do that. We were absolutely devastated. The 3 of us just walked out of the courtroom and out into the foyer of the 4 courts, and the prison van was parked outside on the quays. But obviously, those killers weren't going in it.
The judge released them just with a warning, a slap on the wrist. I mean, that effectively, to my mind, was a license to kill gay people.
I think it's difficult to conceive of any circumstances in which a death, a killing committed in a premeditated fashion by a gang would result in a suspended sentence. And I think that forces one to consider, if Declan Flynn had been an office worker taking a shortcut through a park at night and had been killed in similar circumstances, would those sentences have been as short as they were, and would they have been suspended? I think not.
Nobody who takes another human being's life should walk out the door when they've deliberately set out to cause them harm. Nobody should actually end up walking out the door if they've done that to another human being.
For the Flynn family, the sentences were a denial of justice. For the gay community, it was a call to action.
When the sentence was handed down, it wasn't a surprise. We were on our own, and we had to do something about it.
Declan Flynn was set upon by 5 men, including a youth. Yesterday, his 5 assailants were sentenced in the Central Criminal Court, convicted of the manslaughter of Declan Flynn. All of the sentences were suspended by Mr. Justice Gannon. Now, what this means is that if they don't get into trouble with the police during the period of their suspension, they will not serve any detention for depriving Declan Flynn of his life.
My mother and father were devastated. All their faith in the state was completely obliterated by the way Declan had been treated. There was no support for the family. There was no ability at that time to appeal the sentencing. There was no victim impact statements. When the court case was over and we walked out the door, that was the end of it as far as the state was concerned.
It's important to note that the sentence at the time produced an outcry. There were several debates where Mr. Justice Gannon was criticised in the Dáil. Mary Harney, at the time a Fianna Fáil TD, said that the Minister for Justice should seek his resignation.
When handing down suspended sentences, Mr. Justice Gannon expressed his view that Declan's killers were unlikely to offend again. In the case of Robert Armstrong, he was wrong.
One of those who was convicted of the manslaughter of Declan Flynn and given a suspended sentence went on to commit a very serious criminal offence when he raped a pregnant woman and was subsequently sentenced to 10 years for that offence. I think that raises immediate questions about whether the sentences in the Flynn case were appropriate, and in particular whether it was appropriate for Mr. Justice Gannon to say, as he did, that the accused all came from good families and that it was very unlikely that they would reoffend.
The judge was criticised by politicians, he was criticised in the media, of course he was criticised within the gay community as well, about the leniency of this sentence. Perhaps if Armstrong had been jailed for the killing, would that woman have suffered that trauma? You know, one wonders what was really at play. If this judge, who was apparently very fastidious, very detail-focused, who was not adverse to handing out custodial sentence for incredibly minor crimes. I mean, he handed out a custodial sentence shortly after this trial for someone stealing a handbag.
I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that he was born in 1918. He was in his mid-60s sitting as a judge in the 1980s. He was the product of a very different time and presumably would have brought those values and that life experience to his time on the bench.
Police too came under criticism and were instructed to conduct an inquiry into why nothing had been done to stop the attacks in Fairview Park.
The Garda inquiry consisted of my eldest brother and my father being called down to Fitzgibbon Street Garda station and being interviewed by a guard who had his gun visible on display and being asked what journalists they had been talking to. They had no interest in finding out why nothing was done in Fairview Park to stop the beatings.
Meanwhile, in the killers' community, celebrations were held to mark the outcome of their trials and welcome them home.
Declan Flynn's killers had been let out, and we'd had reports that they'd worked up some celebratory bonfires and had some tinnies, one outrage after another. I mean, it's extraordinarily offensive behaviour. Ireland has failed us, you know. We're on our own. And we had to do something about it.
The outcome of the trial is really what instigated what happened next, which is, you know, people call it the Irish Stonewall. People call it a catalyst moment for the gay communities demanding their rights.
There had been a lot of anger expressed, and we were conscious to try and temper that because we didn't want to provoke a reaction from the local community. So the focus was really on a protest against violence against gays and women. Instead of going to the usual sites, we would take the protest out to Fairview Park where the killing had happened. There had been a victory march by the perpetrators who had been released, and the community had supported that. So this was a way of kind of saying to the community that that's not acceptable.
It was about us trying to reclaim the streets, where we didn't feel welcome and we knew that we had no protection, we had no statutory protection. And then we were going up to the site where he was killed. Being out in the street advocating and making noise didn't really feel that different. What made it special was the scale of it. It was the first time that we were joined by our straight allies, student union groups, radical left-field political parties, civil liberty groups. And that was really important. It was really necessary for us. I'm going to get really upset. It was really necessary for us to feel that level of support from people. Because after the court case, we just felt alone. And I remember us walking up from Liberty Hall, walking up Amiens Street to North Strand. I just remember walking up that street just so angry and also fearful that somebody was going to lob a rock at me.
But there was no violence. Instead, the protesters were met with open public support.
It's been such a show of solidarity, it's just incredible. I'm amazed so many people turned up, and a lot of local people turned up, and they were in favour of what was going on, which was very good.
The reason we're here today is to protest against violence against gays and women.
When you have an incident like somebody getting killed, it is, in many cases, the only way in which an issue like this will be raised publicly, and in which gay people will be taken seriously and their rights will in fact be respected.
Really kind of marked a new type of mass visibility. So you're really seeing like a group of people not only react to an injustice, but actually begin to build the beginnings of a mass movement around that.
The message was now also heard in the Irish Parliament.
But it was the first time in 1983 where we actually heard politicians in both houses of the Oireachtas actually addressing our needs. There was that glimmer of hope that maybe Irish society was on board with us.
Declan's killing helped make gay rights a national issue. Campaigners hoped to force a change in the law and legalise homosexuality. That fight was led by David Norris.
We had to clear away the discriminatory, homophobic legislation before we could get down to reinforcing it with strong, positive legislation for gay people. And my case was that the British Imperial Statute, which had never been discussed, was an infringement of my right to privacy. I couched the letters in the language that I thought would appeal to them. For example, to Fianna Fáil, I said, you call yourselves the Republican Party. How can you possibly support a British imperial statute?
David Norris brought his challenge to the Constitution all the way to Ireland's most powerful court.
On the 22nd of April, the Supreme Court gave its verdict on David Norris's constitutional action. By a 3-2 majority, it upheld the existing law.
After today, it can be said that the Irish Constitution does not protect the fundamental human rights of its own citizens.
But he and his supporters did not give up. They brought their fight to the European Court of Human Rights, and in 1988, they finally won.
The judgment in Senator Norris's favour was given by 8 votes to 6, with the Irish member of the court, Mr Justice Brian Walsh, among those dissenting.
The ruling made clear Ireland's criminalisation of homosexuality was in breach of the European Convention on Human Rights.
We have on our panel, you know, the rules of the soapbox. We listen uninterrupted.
And for some back home, it sparked outrage.
It's not normal for a man to be preoccupied with another man's back passage. But let's face it, this is what the Homosexual Male Act is about.
I mean, that's ridiculous. That's quite insulting. Like, I mean, I'm not...
But support for legalising homosexuality was becoming increasingly mainstream.
I suppose the quick answer is, what about men who are besotted with women's front passages? Is the quick answer there?
The debate raged for 5 years, until in 1993, over a decade after Declan's killing, homosexuality was finally legalised.
Today's European Court decision is the end of a 14-year battle for Senator David Norris.
We were told early on that it would be a difficult and long fight, but we'd win out in the end. And that's exactly what happened.
I went from being a criminal one day to not being a criminal. Coming from a time when you could legitimately be refused service in a shop, in the hotel, whatever. Your boyfriend or girlfriend could be refused hospital visiting rights when their partner's dying of AIDS. and denied any form of family status. It was really, really important that we'd actually moved to this new place.
2018 marked the 25th anniversary of decriminalisation. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, himself a gay man, made an official apology to all who had suffered under Ireland's anti-gay legislation.
The bench where Declan Flynn was killed at Fairview Park was covered with flowers and notes. And we think of him today on this anniversary and the very different Ireland that we now live in.
The government also hosted a state reception in Dublin Castle to mark the anniversary.
I was in Dublin Castle, and it was the first positive thing that had happened since Declan's killing.
Since decriminalisation in 1993, this country has chosen more and more to love rather than to hate.
It was marking the change that had taken place in Irish society. And to that extent, I think it was a very positive thing.
I've seen Pride develop over the many years from the late 70s until today, and it's amazing to see the difference over that amount of time. I mean, back then we kind of gathered in fear and trepidation. We weren't sure what the response would be, particularly in the Fairview March. Today we come here in celebration. We're acknowledging all the achievements we've had over the many years. So while we've much to celebrate today, there retains an element of protest. Protest is definitely on the agenda still for the Pride parades.
We've seen some shocking examples recently of gay men being brutalised and murdered in Ireland.
The vigil held outside the town hall was attended by hundreds. It was within walking distance of where both Aidan Moffat and Michael Snee had lived.
But one of the salient differences between the place we find ourselves in today and the time that Declan Flynn and Charles Self were murdered was that it's no longer acceptable. It's no longer acceptable amongst the mainstream of Irish society, and it's very definitely not accepted by statutory Ireland. We are afforded a level of protection that did not exist, that was unimaginable in the 1980s.
I think it's extraordinarily noble what people did at that time to be so visible in the face of violence. And I think that for the people who were organised that march, who showed up, it was dangerous, and people still did it. As a community, we kind of owe everything to people who created those building blocks at the time, because much harder then than it is now.
It's an extremely important milestone in the LGBT plus story in Ireland. As a gay person myself, I often think if I'd been born 2 decades earlier, might that have been me? Might that have been one of my friends?
It's strange to think that he's become this figure for the gay community now. It's understandable, but at the end of the day, he's not just a headline from a newspaper, or he's not just somebody that maybe represents that particular point in history.
I think Declan would have been very happy with all the changes in society nowadays and the freedom people have, but because he was such a reserved, quiet person, I don't think he would have liked all this attention. You know, he's become an icon. As far as we're concerned, he was our much-loved brother that we lost in horrific circumstances, and we'd like him back.
I would like people to remember that he was our brother, and he was a warm, giving human being. We need to keep ownership of that, because we're still mourning the fact that he's no longer with us.
My name is Richard Thornton. I'm a detective superintendent in the PSNI's organised crime branch. Been in the PSNI just over 23 years. I suppose it Goes back to primary school, the old cops and robbers type thing. That's what attracted me to it. People don't just get up one morning and decide, I think I'm going to rob an ATM.
They knew what they were doing and they knew the areas very well. Some of those machines can hold over 100 grand.
It was a huge challenge for us to cover that big an area with a finite number of resources.
This was going to get much, much worse.
It takes the number of these attacks this year alone to 6.
The 14th,
the 16th, the 18th.
24 ATMs. The groups were nicknamed the Hole in the Wall Gang. It is at the investigators' peril that they underestimate the capabilities of OCGs.
The police were very heavily into saying it's not just a police effort to catch these sort of gangs and these criminals, that people needed to be vigilant and be alert as well.
There's been another ram raid
Following
on
the
a
robbery which happened in
have
the
used
early
a
hours
digger
of this
to rip an
morning.
ATM.
We had no days off, no rest days.
cash machine
The arms digger was also used to steal 2 cash boxes.
The pressure to bring this to a conclusion was immense.
At 4:30 a.m. A stolen digger enters the forecourt of O'Kane's filling station. Followed by a van of masked men. They used the digger to rip an ATM machine out of the shop wall, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The ATM is loaded onto another vehicle and driven off. The attack takes just 4 minutes. It is the 6th attack of its kind in Northern Ireland in just over 3 months.
In investigations like these, which are very, very fast tempo, you don't know where they're going to strike next. You've got to have a solid plan. In October 2018, I came into work when there was a report of an ATM attack. A digger had been used to literally rip the ATM machine out of the shop wall itself, using a digger which had been stolen from a nearby building site.
CCTV showed 2 masked men driving a BMW and towing a trailer that they later used to carry the stolen ATM from the scene.
It was clear to me that this was a very well planned attack, that the individuals concerned knew exactly what they were doing, very skilled in using the digger, but also very forensically aware, given the lengths they went to, which included setting fire to the digger on the petrol forecourt. They had absolutely no regard whatsoever for the safety of anybody. Their only concern was to conceal any evidence that they may leave behind. All in, they were gone in under 2 minutes.
The ATM they took with them was filled with cash. The men left the local shop in ruins. The vehicle and trailer used in the attack were found burnt out nearby.
Well, our colleagues in CID were tasked to the scene, along with crime scene investigators. The first steps was obviously the preservation of the scene and examine it for any forensic material that might be left behind. However, on liaising with my colleagues in CID, it was clear that there was no forensic opportunities left, certainly not in the forecourt, or definitely not in the digger or the vehicle and trailer that were stolen either. So at that time, the trail was ran cold very, very quickly.
Cash machine thefts were on the rise in parts of England. Richard was worried this could be the start of a new type of crime wave in Northern Ireland.
Organised crime groups from here interact with organised crime groups from there. And there's normally a lag. And so my concern was that those attacks would happen here at some point, particularly in the run-up to the autumn and winter months, where you have very short days and very, very long nights, because nights are the criminal's friend. I came into work and there had been a second attack. The exact same, a digger used in a rural area in County Tyrone.
The attack in Fintona was a carbon copy of the attack 5 weeks earlier. A stolen digger, burnt out on a garage forecourt, a local business seriously damaged, the ATM casing transported away and broken into in a remote area. 15 days later.
This was just after 4 o'clock this morning. A stolen digger rammed into the side of the Spa in Killyclogher. Thieves had attempted to tear the cash machine from the side of the shop, but residents were quick to react. The digger was set on fire after the incident. Police believe it was stolen from a nearby building site. The attackers may have failed in their attempt to remove the cash machine, but concern in the community is still high.
This was a pattern now starting to emerge, and one that concerned me as to where it would actually end. We were in the middle of winter, and we still had a long way to go to when the night started to shorten.
Journalist Niamh Campbell covered the stories of the attacks and their aftermaths.
Where I'm actually from myself is a small area in Tyrone called Killyshall. It's very, very rural. I think we actually only have one ATM machine there. In terms of the sophistication and scale and frequency of that 2018, 2019 spree, I don't think anything like that has ever come under my nose before. It's funny because it wasn't actually sophisticated in that they were just ramming a digger into the ATM machine, but all of the plan that goes into it, all of the recon, around the area beforehand, they knew what they were doing and they knew the areas very well. It caused a massive flurry everywhere, and I think a lot of those rural areas felt forgotten, and they thought, the police aren't really helping at the minute, so what if we get hit next?
Those communities that had already been hit were feeling the effects.
People assume that ATM heists, where there's nobody around, it's a victimless crime. But it's not. It has all, like any crime, it always has wider consequences.
Feeling sick just when I heard it at the start, but we'll get past it. We'll keep going.
You work hard, you build.
For guys to come in the middle of the night and take it out in a matter of minutes, it's very frustrating.
The problem with all of this is the local community is affected because the banks have closed and the ATM is used here by many people.
It's nothing to stop someone from doing this again to any other premises and any other businesses. Business just watch out,
Given the pressure that police were under from the public at large to bring these to a halt, I knew that we had to take a different approach, something the public could see, something that would bring pressure to bear immediately on those groups that were responsible for this.
In just 4 months, criminals had carried out 3 successful raids with great precision. Richard believed this was the work of a professional organised crime group, or OCG.
The PSNI's organised crime branch is a proactive policing branch which go after organised crime groups, or as they're more commonly known, organised crime gangs, who are involved in different levels of serious crime. It is quite intense.
The appeal of these crimes for OCGs was obvious to Richard.
The main reason is money, and they need money not just to line their own pockets, but also most of the organised crime groups are involved in drug trafficking, and you need money to purchase drugs to bring it into the country and facilitate the bringing in discreetly or without detection the drugs into the country.
Given the level of criminality involved, a specialist task force was set up, not only to prevent further cash machine thefts, but also to disrupt the OCG's other criminal enterprises.
OCGs themselves are very much like a jigsaw puzzle. Some are 100-piece jigsaw puzzles, some are 1,000, and some are 10,000. And so it's a very complex policing environment which we find ourselves in, and becoming ever more difficult and challenging to disrupt. A fourth attack happened, this time in Antrim, where a double ATM machine was stolen.
A large digger was also used to steal 2 cash boxes.
Those ATMs were stolen, again, very, very efficiently by the group involved. And they made good their escape very quickly after that.
The thieves were in 2 stolen vehicles, one of which was found burnt out nearby.
And the pace of the attacks increased dramatically.
What surprised me was that on the day after that, a further ATM attack occurred.
Forensic officers looking for clues following the robbery which happened in the early hours of this morning at this petrol station just outside Moira. Police believe a number of men were responsible.
The highly skilled and well-organised attacks left no question that detectives were witnessing a crime wave run by professionals who had the upper hand.
When an OCG plan an attack like this, be it an ATM attack, a robbery, or a cash and transit robbery, they will always have lookouts, they will always have a getaway car, they will always have a plan. And this was no different. The digger ripped the ATMs out, placed them onto a trailer and drove off, and the other individuals involved, of which there were several, got into various other vehicles and made good their escape.
I think this is whenever they started to get a bit more cocky and they thought, we'll just hit places up in quick succession. Geographically, they're very close to each other.
The robbers smashed this stolen digger through a nearby fence before ripping the ATM out of the wall. They then set the digger, as you can see, on fire.
Considerable damage done to the shop itself, which temporarily forced it to close. Immediately, this became apparent to me that this was going to get much, much worse.
ATM attacks were springing up across Northern Ireland and the Republic.
In Northern Ireland, there's been another ram raid on a cash machine. Most of the raids have happened in rural areas using mechanical diggers to try to pull the ATMs away from the wall, but police still have no idea who's behind the attacks.
Almost every attack required in-depth knowledge of the surrounding area.
Well, my initial instinct on this was that they were local. When you carry out any attack, you always plan your escape just as well as you plan the attack itself. Therefore, you tend to commit such an attack relatively close to where your base is, so you can get away, get the ATM away, get the money out of it, then retreat back to your home without police or anyone else knowing who you actually are.
The local knowledge of the areas shown by the thieves and the spread of attacks across Northern Ireland and the Republic left Richard convinced multiple gangs had to be responsible.
A hole in the wall where a hole-in-the-wall cash machine used to be. It's becoming a regular occurrence in Northern Ireland.
It indicates to me that there's a series of copycat raids going on where criminals recognise that in a matter of minutes you can take something like £120,000 out of an ATM this size, and it's absolutely scandalous.
But Richard needed more information.
My first action was to go through all of the information that we had, but also to get that community intelligence that we needed to clearly identify who was responsible and to report suspicious activity.
The task force appealed to the public.
We will continue to do all we can to catch those responsible. Tonight again, we will have local police patrolling areas which could be vulnerable to an attack, and detectives remain dedicated to investigating the thefts that have taken place. I assure you this remains a key policing priority.
As a result of appeals to the public through various media releases, our community intelligence picture started to increase dramatically. It confirmed that there was more than one gang. There was one in Antrim, there was one in Tyrone, and there was one in the South Armagh, South Down area.
Gardaí chased the gang operating in Monaghan and Louth.
My focus was on the Antrim OCG. They were the most prolific, they were the most efficient in many ways, and the tempo with which they were carrying out attacks was starting to increase.
Richard and his team now established a profile of the gang responsible for the attacks and an understanding of how they were operating.
People don't just get up one morning and decide, I think I'm going to rob an ATM, and do it very, very skillfully. That requires the group to covertly reconnoitre the area that they're going to attack, look for their escape routes. They need to be familiar with those surroundings, so if police do come, they know where to go to. They have somewhere to go to. The further they go away, the greater the risk of getting caught. You also have to know when the best time to attack it is, because when you attack an ATM, you want to know that there's money in it.
They were sussing the places out before they went. They were sitting outside the shops during the day. They knew when the ATM machines were filled up. Some of those machines can hold over 100 grand. So they were making sure they were getting the maximum amount that they could.
After it's been successfully reconnoitred and they've agreed on a time when they're going to attack it, they'll have a scout car out in front, making sure that there's no vehicle checkpoints, that there's nothing that may obstruct their way. The digger either stolen at the time, in the minutes before the attack, or pre-stolen and brought to the area. They have to get it away to an area where they feel safe to harvest the ATM. And harvesting the ATM requires the use of angle grinders, crowbars, sledgehammers. It's not an easy task to do. It's something that's going to take up to a couple of hours to do. They need to have the confidence that they can do that without being observed or overheard. They then have an amount of cash that they have to realise. That, again, is another strand. And they have to think about all of that before they actually commit the offence itself. So it's very prolonged. It is at the investigators' peril that they underestimate the capabilities and abilities of OCGs to carry out their criminality. This is why it is important to get into the way they think, what makes them tick. Because it's only when you understand them and how they plan and plot things, then that increases your chances of actually arresting them, charging them, and convicting them.
A bank was targeted in Newton Abbey. That makes it 6 successful ATM robberies using diggers since January.
Again, coming up bank holidays, they knew it would be quieter on the roads, but the cash machines would be totally full. Literally exact same again. Digger, 3 o'clock in the morning, and the vehicle that was used to lift the ATM machine and get away was burnt out straight after too. It just felt so repetitive. It was the same thing over and over again. You nearly thought, is this actually definitely a new one?
This was the 4th attack carried out by the Antrim OCG. Attacks were becoming prolific across Northern Ireland.
The thieves were in 2 stolen vehicles.
The robbers smashed this stolen digger through a nearby fence.
It is, they're stealing thousands of pounds on a regular basis.
The thieves have escaped with this ATM.
The case remains unsolved.
Thieves have used a digger to rip an ATM from the side of a shop in Hull.
Thieves took this digger from a nearby building site before ripping the cash machine from the wall of the Nisa store. They set the vehicle on fire before making off with the ATM.
A lot of damage caused. CMMO, another rural village ripped of a very precious service. They made their escape in very, very efficient form, but it gave us that little bit extra information.
As the thefts increased, Richard knew he had to find a way of getting ahead of the Antrim OCG. If he could identify the gang's potential targets, he could catch them red-handed. Richard needed to give himself an advantage and reached out to retailers and to the banks themselves.
My name is Simon Hutchinson. I chair the Northern Ireland Interbank Security Group. That group consists of the heads of security of all of the banks in Northern Ireland, the post office, cash carriers, Safer Cash, who look after basically the financial institutions across the United Kingdom. We all realised, OK, this is now a major, major issue. We were very fortunate that the detective superintendent in charge of the organised crime branch invited the group to come to his headquarters, and he was going to give us a full briefing. We were able then to tell that group, those teams, where every single ATM was in Northern Ireland, the description of the ATM, photographs, serial numbers, what mitigation technology-wise we had in place in each of those ATMs. And by the end of that meeting, we were able to identify circa 900 ATMs in sight, and that actually blew the superintendent away.
Surveilling 900 cash machine sites across Northern Ireland was an impossible task.
So with that, I applied certain criteria and essentially traffic light all of those ATM machines into red, which I considered high risk, amber, medium risk, green, low risk. And that allowed us then to focus, but also to get us ahead of the groups that were responsible to increase our chances of catching them. That strategy had to complement the ATMs that we had mapped, because I had to make use of the uniform resources that we had available to us to give them clear focus, but also to trip the OCGs up into making a mistake.
Our business owners understood that and give us bigger budgets to spend more money on the mitigation of the high-risk ATMs.
Richard was also going to need all the help he could get. His task force alone couldn't monitor all at-risk cash machines in range of the Antrim OCG, nor did they have the local community knowledge of neighbourhood cops. He looked to the newly appointed district commander for Antrim for her specialist expertise.
It was a new start for me, a lot of responsibility, a significant number of officers and staff to lead and to manage. And I was aware at that time that the numbers of ATM thefts was starting to increase across the country. I took on the role of coordination of the local policing response for what we call North Area, which is 4 policing districts. So a large swathe of the country that we were trying to prepare a very visible response and deterrent to the ATM thefts that were occurring at the time. It was a huge challenge for us to cover that big an area with a finite number of resources.
What we actually needed to do is to maximise pressure on these individuals. It requires partnership and an understanding from the public. It's the only way to resolve these in the long run.
Richard knew Sue Ann's help could prove a turning point.
My role essentially was looking out into the community. So we were looking at prevention, provide that deterrent, a reactive capability, which was essentially around having police officers, high visibility patrols in vulnerable areas, and then also that community engagement and that reassurance.
It was very important that we got the public on side. There was a lack of community intelligence being received by ourselves. There was a lack of reporting on suspicious activity, but also a lack of understanding as to the impact that this was having. So that was something that had to change in order for ourselves to get ahead of this group or groups and to stop them from doing it.
At 3:30 a.m. A stolen digger and tractor make their way to the centre of the village. They stop at an ATM outside 2 coffee shops, rip it from the wall, and load it onto a getaway vehicle. They set the other vehicles on fire and make off in the direction of Portrush.
Just hours earlier, Market Square was ablaze after the digger and tractor used to steal the cash machine were set alight by thieves.
I was the owner of Lily's at the time of the ATM robbery. My name is Jeffrey McKillop. I'm a local lad from the village of Bushmills. All the shops are locally based. There's no multinationals here apart from the supermarkets. So it means any money that's generated in the village goes back into it. The night it happened, of course, I was at home and I got a phone call early morning saying, look, you'd better get out here, something bad's happened. And whenever I got here, the whole diamond was sealed off. It was like something from a movie, you know. Police cars everywhere. In the background, you could see this massive hole in the wall. Just couldn't believe it. Well, the ATM was in the corner, you see here, but they ripped the whole wall out to get it. They stole a digger from a local outdoor pursuit centre, and then they stole the tractor from a local farmer. They placed the ATM on the back of a flat-back lorry, and they headed out of the village towards Portrush, passed the Lewis Castle, turned down left, but the ATM machine bounced off the back of the lorry onto the side of the road. After all the destruction and all the mayhem that caused to the village, they still walked away empty-handed. I think it's just disbelief. How would anybody feel they had the right to come in and violate our wee town, you know? And I think it shook them up a fair bit for a few days. And but as communities do and people do, they rally around and they get together and they get their head down and get on with it, you know? But still always in the back of their mind, you know, that it happened, you know?
Despite the police's best efforts, it seemed as though the Antrim OCG were always one step ahead.
As we moved into April 2019, myself and my team had been working constantly since we took on the operation in mid-February. No rest days. We had no days off. The shortest day we had was 12 hours, in most cases 16 to 20 hours.
Every time there was another ATM theft, that pressure mounted. There's no doubt about that. For me, the challenge as well was that this couldn't be our only focus. That whilst this was a priority and it was a critical incident for the organisation, and rightly so, we also had to deal with other types of crime that were happening.
The tempo quickly picked up during the course of April. We had multiple gang sprees right across Northern Ireland. It was a very high-pressure situation for us all. Tiredness was creeping in. Exhaustion was creeping in.
It was deflating, personally deflating, but equally I knew that we were close. Unfortunately, these individuals were evading us, and that was frustrating.
Richard needed more intelligence, but time wasn't on his side. And there was a problem.
The police were very heavily into saying it's not just a police effort to catch these sort of gangs and these criminals, that people needed to be vigilant and be alert as well, but very hard to do whenever it's happening between the hours of like 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. in those really rural areas where there's not a lot of light.
And for some of the public, their sympathies lay elsewhere.
A number of years previously, we had the financial crash, and there was almost an air that this was a Robin Hood type crime, that they were stealing from the banks, to quote many of the social media posts that were put up, and that the banks deserved it.
They weren't holding anybody at gunpoint, they weren't going in and terrorising the staff. And again, I think that's why some people were saying it was a victimless crime. I think some people thought at the beginning, whoever's doing this is smart in a way, because a lot of people don't really like banks to begin with anyway.
The damage to the buildings, once the diggers gone into it, was huge. Large gaping holes, to the point where certainly amongst social media, the groups responsible were nicknamed the Hole in the Wall Gang. I had immediate strategies to highlight the impact that this was having on local community, but also that those responsible weren't there to get their own back on the banks, but it was there to line their own pockets and to further their own criminal enterprises.
For the Antrim OCG, the risk of being caught was outweighed by the potential reward. Richard wanted to change that and turned to the bank's security to take a proactive approach in limiting the OCG's success.
What we were able to do was something very, very simple, was reduce the cash holdings in some high-risk ATMs and put a sign up, a simple sign up, due to ATM attacks in this area, there has been a reduction in cash holdings in this ATM. Now, the kickback was, unfortunately, over weekends and bank holiday weekends, the cash ran out. But the signage actually was quite important, and we got feedback from the public to say, you know something, that's probably the simplest, cheapest mitigation, security mitigation you have, because they will take notice. I mean, we're spending thousands and thousands of pounds on other technologies and mitigations, but a simple sign, and none of those ATMs that had signage were ever hit. The cash loss, initially there was some significant numbers, but because of course they were fully loaded at that stage before we started to defund the ATMs. However, there was only, I think, one, maybe two that were sitting in six-figure loss. The cash loss was insignificant compared to the collateral damage.
The pressure to bring this to a conclusion, despite us being 6-7 weeks into it, was immense, and something that we had to make a breakthrough on one of the gangs at some point.
While the Antrim OCG was continuing the attacks at pace, intelligence had been slowly trickling in, leading to a breakthrough.
Jamie McConnell, David McClurkin, Kenneth Clark, and Gary Kincaid. The four names were no surprise to me.
The men were well known to police.
They were indeed from the local area. It all made sense. And then some of them were very adept and had experience in using diggers. When you have it narrowed down, you've got to find out every minor detail you can about how they live their day-to-day lives, what makes them tick, to get yourself into the best position that you can to make it stick when you do arrest them and you want to charge them. You're balancing that with all the other pressures, and that is why ultimately myself and the team had worked 62 days in a row. That is what was required.
The Antrim OCG had been meticulous and had left no forensic traces at any of the scenes. Richard knew he was going to have to catch them in the act, but this meant officers potentially being put directly in the path of danger.
Uniformed officers working extremely long hours at night, often potentially being faced with a very risky scenario if they come across one of these crimes in action, and how they're going to manage that, and how we ensure that it's safely brought to a conclusion.
A police officer's natural instinct is always to run towards trouble. If something's happening, they want to stop it happening. However, when it involves a large piece of heavy plant machinery and you, as a police officer, are standing in the way of their escape route, that was where my concerns became very real.
However, Richard had been developing a plan.
Using the mapping and risk register of ATMs, that allowed me to come up with a very effective plan to focus on hotspots within a certain defined area of where the various gangs lived. So that when an attack happened, I could bring all of our overt resources to bear. I knew it was only a matter of time before they were going to make another attack. The nights were getting shorter. They were greedy. They wanted as much money as they can. But I knew at some point they had to retreat back into their patch, so to speak, so that they could maximize the number of attacks and get away quickly. Because they were definitely feeling the heat. There's no doubt about that. I knew that they were out wrecking various sites, and it was a case of which one are they going to pick.
Richard wanted to keep his uniform resources close to the sites of the most at-risk ATMs. He believed deploying them to the scene as quickly as possible would force the Antrim OCG into a mistake, and he didn't have to wait long to test his theory. At 3 a.m, a pickup drives into the supermarket car park. It stops in front of a double cash machine. 2 men get out. They meet a tractor towing a digger, both stolen from nearby. The digger prepped for unloading from the flatbed trailer. One of the men gets into the cab and drives the digger off the trailer, through bollards, towards the cash machines, which are ripped out. The tractor is set alight. The cash machines loaded onto the pickup, and the gang make their getaway.
That dreaded phone call that I got so many times in the early hours of the morning, Ken. It was a double ATM attack, and I activated the plan. Everything that I could get, I threw at it. And it was so intensive that in a 3-hour period after that, I took and received in the region of 130 phone calls on 2 work phones that I had, not including the police radio I had as well. What we quickly established after the Ballymena attack happened was they had driven to another location in a rural area with the ATM machine, and they had another car planted, which they got into in an effort to get away. We nearly got them. The police descended on it. We had other measures in place that allowed us to lead us to that car.
The patrol car landed just as they were making off. One of the guys actually, pulled down his trousers and mounted the police. This is whenever I suppose you could pardon the pun, the wheels started to come off because, they'd burnt vehicles, they'd jumped out of their getaway vehicle, all the rest of it. But this is whenever they started to, I think, really taunt the police.
Yes, they got away, but they were lucky.
Robbers left the scene with the 2 cash machines on the back of a pickup truck, but when police caught up with them, they abandoned the vehicle and the machines in the driveway of a nearby home. They escaped on foot.
It was the nearest of misses, but given how close they had been, Richard had faith the plan would work. And just 4 days later, he was given another chance.
The phone rings again in the early hours of the morning. There's another attack. And this time it's on the Tully Road near Belfast International Airport.
Nuts Corner, again, very rural area. The owner, he had woken up, I think, in the middle of the night, around 3:30 again, just as the digger, whatever was used to actually get the ATM machine, just as it was being set on fire.
Again, within the catchment area that I had mapped out, and again, it was, let's throw everything at this. The words that the controller said to me on the phone was, we've got runners. And that's when I knew we have them. As the arrests came in, the names didn't mean a thing to me. As night moved into morning, we quickly established that these weren't the gang.
It wasn't the Antrim OCG that Richard had been looking for, but others working in the same area.
We made a series of 27 searches that day. As a result of that attack, we were able to ultimately charge the 4 that we had arrested with that attack. And ultimately, what that did do with the arrests that we made on the 30th, that was the end of the digger rip-out attacks that Northern Ireland had experienced. It was curious, but just suddenly stopped. I knew, and I had anticipated this because the nights were very, very short at that stage.
Although the task force had made 4 arrests, Richard knew the Antrim OCG members were still at large.
The question for me was, were they wanting or willing to chance their luck again? And I knew they would. In keeping with tradition, criminals will adopt the approach of, let's have the heat die down a little bit, and then we'll go back and do it all over again. I knew what they were up to. They had a good idea what I was up to, but I knew they would come at it again, and I would leave them a surprise for when they did.
While the attacks ended with the brighter nights, the task force worked tirelessly, enhancing ATM security and securing heavy machinery and farm equipment.
So you've got a multifaceted approach that you're trying to employ, and that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. There's a price tag associated with it.
Richard had been in close contact with business leaders for months, ensuring they were prepared.
My name is Glenn Roberts. I'm Chief Executive Retail and I. We are the main representative body for the independent retail and wholesale sector in Northern Ireland. Not for 1 minute did we think that this was over. We had to be constantly vigilant. Obviously, our members upped their game in terms of taking the security procedures. Many of them created almost bunkers. They put concrete bollards in front of them. The ATM manufacturers made sure that they were looking again at the security of these machines. We were getting across to our members, please don't have these ATMs filled up at night. And to the general public to make sure they're aware of it, engaging with the construction sector to make sure plant equipment and machinery was secured.
As the darker nights drew in, Richard was left to wait.
It was in the forefront of my mind, the hours are going to change at the end of October. Are these attacks going to start again? Are our plans robust enough to deal with any resurgence in it? When an attack happened on the 6th of December 2019, when the dreaded phone call came in the middle of the night again, I knew immediately what it was. But when I found out where it was, then it was a case of, I think I've got them this time. Because we knew exactly where that ATM machine was going.
At 3 a.m, a supermarket is targeted. A tractor and digger, stolen nearby, are driven into the car park. They're used to remove the ATMs, which are loaded onto a getaway vehicle. The digger and tractor are then set alight, A vehicle loaded with cash machines is seen leaving the scene. Richard had laid a trap that the OCG were walking straight into.
The OCG has come through up into the main entrance around the back of the petrol station to the main building. And they've had a vehicle and a trailer and a digger and a number of individuals who had their identities hidden by masks and boiler suits on. This is all done in a very short period of time in the space of a couple of minutes. And they've ripped out the ATM machine and made good their escape very effectively, very quickly out into the countryside. It was a very brazen attack, very close to the local police station. So it was a change of tactic.
But Richard's plan was about to go into action.
As soon as I get the phone call and I'm told where it was stolen, whilst it always comes as a shock, I was happy because I knew that ATM had a certain measures in it that would allow me to quickly identify where they were taking it to.
The extra budget that we were given by our business leads means that we could buy extra equipment, which we put on permanent loan to the police.
We had security measures which enabled us to be able to follow the location of the ATM.
We were able to relay that very quickly to responding officers. So rather than everybody go to where the attack has happened, it's everywhere goes to where the ATM is. We initiated the plan that I had put in place. Basically involved me telling them, send everybody.
They successfully got the ATM out of the housing. They were definitely unaware of the speed with which we responded.
Police crews from different parts of the police descended on here from as far away as Belfast. The ATMs themselves are heavy, so you can't travel fast and you can't travel too far along backcountry roads. Nonetheless, we were able to locate the position, direct the resources into that location. All I can imagine was that they looked up onto the dark sky and saw a haze of blue lights coming towards their location. That would have been a good shock for them, which is what they needed.
The gang had gotten away, but the police's quick response had forced them into making a mistake.
At the location, when police arrived, they found the stolen ATM. A number of discarded items had been left there by those responsible, which allowed us, again, very significant forensic opportunities that we were able to exploit.
We found the ATMs intact, the cash hadn't been taken out of them.
Crucially, the speed of the police response allowed crime scene investigators to gather both fingerprints and DNA from the scene.
With the sufficient evidence that we needed, we knew we got them.
That ultimately led us to identify and arrest the members of the OCG responsible, namely McConnell, Kincaid, and McClurkin and Clark.
When those arrests happened, we were obviously able to, at last, give a good news story to our communities, which was fantastic. And I think it was a vindication for those officers who'd spent hours of time across that period, quite a long period, working towards that particular outcome. So having that conversation with communities was very rewarding.
It was extremely welcome news that they were arrested because it sent the signal out that these criminal gangs could be caught and they didn't have a blank check to attack and plunder willy-nilly.
But the job wasn't over. Police had to make sure they had enough evidence to convict and turned their attention to mobile phones to link the gang members to the other attacks.
So for this investigation, the digital forensics was key. As technology evolves, the reliance upon that technology amongst all of us means that we literally can't go outside the door without some type of device. Now, they leave a trail, like a breadcrumb trail. And the task for us was placing members of OCGs in the particular area, in the particular scene at the relevant time, so that, and then attribute that to those individuals, which will prove their presence at the time of the offences. We were able to prove through the use of digital forensics that the four were present at several of the ATM attacks, and that they had, in fact, carried out or conspired to carry out those attacks.
Many followed the trial closely, including lawyer Dara Mackin.
This was one of the greatest criminal enterprises in recent times, and certainly one of the most complex criminal investigations. I think the sheer size of the criminal enterprise is quite stark. This isn't the traditional thief in the jeweller shop pocketing the diamond watch. This was something of a much greater scale. This was a circumstantial case, and what that means is that maybe one strand of evidence in itself isn't enough to prove guilt. However, when you put the strands together, many threads make a strong rope.
Although police couldn't charge them with every incident, they were still able to build a strong case.
Those factors taken together not only proved that each of the individuals at different times were in contact with different exhibits, such as vehicles, but also showed that they were in contact at material times and also were in the vicinity of certain locations at material times.
While circumstantial, Richard's case was, however, still compelling.
Ultimately, the individuals in this case accepted that they played a role in the offences in question. Now, whilst they didn't accept the totality of the offence, didn't accept being present, they did accept being involved at different levels. Mr. Clark was handed 5 years and 8 months. Mr. McConnell was given a lesser sentence of 3 years and 8 months. Mr. Kincaid was given a sentence of 11 months. And Mr. McClurkin was given a combination order, given the fact that he was charged with a lesser offence than the other two suspects.
The sentences were based on the degree of involvement each admitted.
Not a lot for the amount that they did, and the fact that the money, the majority of the money, including the criminal damage to all the properties and the diggers and stuff, all that, you know, amounted to like well over £2 million.
What we've seen here was very, very unique, in which the Director of Public Prosecutions referred the case to the Court of Appeal, as he felt that the sentences were unduly lenient. The Court of Appeal did increase one of the sentences on behalf of Mr. Clark, but refused to increase the sentence of Mr. McConnell.
McConnell's sentence stayed the same due to mitigating factors, and the sentences of the other two men were deemed appropriate and were not appealed.
The impact of losses of ATMs would have a massive impact that isn't perhaps apparent to many looking in. They bring a vital service to shops themselves, to retailers. In fact, when an ATM is put into a shop, it increases footfall within that shop by about 10%. And it enables people to have quick and easy access to their own money.
A lot of those rural areas really do still rely on cash, especially the more elderly population. So a lot of those wee businesses, people maybe only go in and buy something in the shop or get a coffee or whatever because there's an ATM machine outside. So it's so vital to the local economy. These ATM machines themselves cost about 16 grand, I think, sometimes, the actual equipment in itself and replacing the walls around it and things like that. So that is how the business did suffer.
You can't underestimate the stress that that has on not just the business owner and indeed their staff, but the local community as well.
And there's long-lasting effects on local communities. You know, a shop in a small village or hamlet, you know, essentially it's the heart of that very small community. And when it's put out of action because someone decided it'd be a good idea to line their own pockets with the contents of the ATM, it really does leave its impact. And to this day, you can still see the scars of it. 6 years on, you still see some shops which haven't been able to replace that ATM.
From a police standpoint, however, there was still cause to be proud.
Once you've got them, you're just relieved that you don't have to go, or anyone else has to go through that again. You're also relieved that you have, to some extent, nothing's ever foolproof, but to some extent, have future-proofed the ATM estate. And your job ultimately is to catch the bad guys and put them behind bars where they belong. And that was the satisfying part of that.
For some, the sentences didn't seem to match the devastation that had been left behind.
We would have much preferred that these crime gangs got much stronger sentences. I think it was good that they were caught. It was good that they were ultimately before the courts and did get sentenced. But we would have much preferred much stronger sentences to put down the provision that if you do this, you will get caught.
I think the whole country was relieved because, again, you're sitting in, maybe your town hadn't been hit yet, but it could have been anybody at any time. So, yeah, really, really glad to hear they've been caught. It's just a pity it took so long, but it's the damage they caused until they got there. I think that's the lasting legacy of it.
It's extremely difficult to put a figure, but certainly this would be running into millions of pounds worth of damage. Because it just wasn't the damage that was done to the store. It was the loss of trade. It was the increased insurance premiums. And it was the, if you like, the psychological, the emotional damage that was done as well.
Sometimes I wonder if they hadn't have gotten so sort of cocky. Like, would they have been caught if they had just kept going the way they were going, you know, very quickly, hitting up smaller places, smaller service stations that were more rural in the middle of nowhere with no CCTV? Would they have been caught? But in the end, it is sort of like a novel or something, you know, that they did their own sort of greed, their own sort of pride, and you know, how untouchable they thought they were. That's what maybe got them in the end.
For Richard, the threat posed to local communities by groups like the Antrim OCG remains.
Will ATM attacks occur again? Absolutely. We try to keep ahead of OCGs. OCGs try to keep ahead of us. They find a way, and then we have to find another way to counter that. And so the process goes on. We will always be committed to tackling it, to catching those who are involved, and you will be caught. No matter how hard you try, your luck runs out sometime, and we will catch you.
Nhà nhiều thứ, đồng nghiệp quây quần mừng nhà mới, niềm vui nhân đôi, không khí rộn ràng trong ngày tân gia đồng nghiệp, chia sẻ niềm vui hạnh phúc cùng đồng nghiệp trong ngày vào nhà mới, kể nhiều để khôn sách nói hiểu ngay. sẽ được đi ra ngoài. Chắc là tiến thì chính xác vợ luôn. Mình đang nghĩ là lý do là gì? Đấy là mình nghĩ em. Động viên luôn. Mừng nói. Chết ba mặt rồi. Rồi nó đây vợ cha bảo có say quá thì sao không còn ngủ lại được. Không cần phải cứ uống nhiệt tình cho em thì đấy lý do quá đẳng cấp nên là cấp phép lại cơ. Còn đấy chắc thì Huỳnh cháy lắm nhỉ. Chúc mừng anh. Chúc mừng anh sai.